Good evening and welcome to Viewpoint, the options. In exactly 2 weeks, registered voters in Gibraltar will be asked whether legislation that regulates the termination of pregnancy should be brought into force. The legislation is the Crimes Amendment Act 2019. It was passed by majority in the Gibraltar Parliament in July 2019. Tonight we are live from the Leisure Cinemas. In the next hour we give both yes and no campaigners a chance to answer questions from the public. A limited number of tickets were issued on a first-come, first-served basis. To those joining us here tonight, thank you. This can be a topic, of course, that people have strong views on. We do hope to maintain a respectful atmosphere throughout. When we take your questions for the campaigners, we'll give priority to the questions that came in first, and we'll also try to achieve some balance. The Gibraltar for Yes campaign was drawn to go first. Welcome to Selena Victory. You have 1 minute now to deliver an opening statement.
The World Health Organization say that every individual has the right to decide freely and responsibly the number, spacing and timing of their children. Access to legal, safe and comprehensive abortion is essential for the attainment of high possible level of sexual and reproductive health. Restriction on services also impact more severely on lower income families, with access being a privilege of the rich, leaving poorer families little choice but to resort to illegal or unsafe practices, or to have larger families than they can afford to look after properly, affecting the life chances of the whole family, especially that of other siblings. Every single international human rights and public health body supports access to safe, legal abortion services. It is a fundamental healthcare right. Abortion is one of the oldest medical procedures and will continue to happen whether we legalise it or not. Europe has the lowest abortion rates in the world and the most liberal legislation in the world. The evidence is clear. In order to reduce abortion rates, we need to legalise and regulate abortion.
Selena Victory for the Gibraltar for Yes campaign. Let me tell you what the legal effect of a yes vote would be. This is taken from the neutral information booklet that has been distributed by the referendum organisers. If a majority votes yes, the government must, within 28 days, bring into force the Crimes Amendment Act 2019. When it comes into force, the circumstances under which a pregnancy may be terminated in Gibraltar will be greater, as described in the guide. Okay, well, we're going to go to the floor now, and our first question is from
Tessa.
Tessa. Thank you.
Okay. Following an abortion, women are at a 34% higher risk of developing anxiety disorders, at a 37% higher risk of suffering from depression, at an 81% higher risk of having mental problems, at a 110% higher risk of abusing alcohol, at a 155% higher risk of committing suicide. These statistics are provided by the British Journal of Psychiatry. So my question is, if helping women is your top priority, why do pro-choice tend to suppress this kind of information? Thank you very much.
Well, I'm not disputing your figures, but I would like to see them, because all the overwhelming evidence that I have goes to the contrary. And that is evidence from the British Medical Association and from various studies which have concluded that the increased risk of mental health problems in women post-abortion probably arise from the lack of support throughout abortion. The Turnaway study is the most comprehensive study, which is, results have just been published, which has followed up women for 5 years after abortion, and 95% of women have said that they do not regret having the abortion. The most important indicator of whether a woman suffers with mental health problems following an abortion is whether they had mental health problems prior to the abortion. So that is why it is absolutely crucial that the support is there prior to the abortion, that these women are identified. It is not possible to say what those women would have been like if they had been forced to carry those pregnancies to term. Because if there's already a history of psychiatric problems, imagine the trauma, the additional trauma of having to go through a pregnancy that they don't want. So I appreciate that there might be some studies which raise this, but if you take all the studies of the whole, as a whole, and you can look at the Turnaway study, you can look at the British Medical Association, and you can look at a number of mental health studies. And I'd like to tell people that all the studies that I am quoting are in the Gibraltar for Yes page. All the studies and all the evidence that I will present will be on there, and they show that there is no difference in mental health outcomes. In fact, there are better long-term mental health outcomes in women who have been able to have a choice about what they want to have, about whether they want to have an abortion or not. And this is not about forcing women to have an abortion or not. I'm sure anybody that took whatever decision they took against their choice will probably suffer consequences after and regret after, not because either they had it or they didn't have it, but it was because it wasn't explored and they weren't counselled properly. And that is the main thing that we would like to introduce. We would like people to know
Thank
that
you,
they have
Selena
an informed
Victory,
choice.
for the Gibraltar for Yes campaign. Answers are limited to 2 minutes. Our next question is Patricia.
Hi. Many of us here have seen the ultrasounds of our own little babies and watched the milestones. How can those campaigning for abortion defend the ending of these little human lives?
Well, for starters, we're not campaigning for the ending of human lives. We're campaigning for people to have the choice about whether to continue a pregnancy. The ultrasound, the moment of the ultrasound is not a moment of joy and happiness for everybody. The moment of the ultrasound can be a moment of anxiety, a moment of stress. If a woman that goes on to have a child with a fetal fatal abnormality, or if she develops health problems, that can be a moment of genuine distress and anxiety. And I think we need to accept that moment is not everybody experiences that moment. So people go on to have pregnancies which are much wanted, which then develop problems. So we need to be aware of all the implications. And because an embryo or a fetus shows what we project to it, the signs of life that we project onto it, it still does not mean that the life of that fetus or that embryo outweighs the wishes of the women, in my opinion. I respect your opinion, but I am saying that in my opinion, the life of a living, breathing woman with a family, with commitments, with problems of their own, overrides the right to life of a small fetus in the early stages of pregnancy.
Next question is from Soraya.
Good evening. What's the difference between abortion on demand and abortion by request?
There's a big difference, and let's talk about this legislation, because we can talk about different legislations. This is not abortion on demand, and it's not even abortion on request. This is a situation where a person goes to their doctor and says, look, I have a situation of a pregnancy. I think I fall into certain legal categories as to why I wish to not continue this pregnancy. The doctor would then have to look to see whether you fall into those categories. A second doctor will have to be consulted, and only if you fall under those strict legal categories will you be allowed to consider to have a termination of your pregnancy. That is very different to going up and saying, I want an abortion. It is not abortion on request, and it is not abortion on demand.
Okay, our next question is from George. George is down here. If we can get a microphone to George.
Where's the question?
I'm afraid you're going to have to work from memory, George.
Okay. You've just mentioned the parliamentary booklet over there, and on page 3 in particular, the document says, and in the second, third and fourth situations, the third and fourth situations, very good.
Second, third and fourth situations, yes.
Yes. I can't see it. There is no prescribed limitation of time. Now, this is not something that the Campaign for Yes or Save Babies Vote No are saying. This is something that the neutral document says to me. Now, if that's the case, to me, it actually means that there is no limitations at all. So what are your views on that? Because you've just said that it's not on demand and it's not on request. This tells you there's absolutely no limitations. Now, once you say this, and once this piece of legislation is out there, clearly it's open to abuse.
Okay, well, there's two things there, and one is that if you take those two in isolation, of course, that's the interpretation you could give. But if you look at section 161, which is child destruction, that very clearly says that child destruction is an offence that is committed when a person has the intent to destroy the life of a child capable of being born alive. And if you look at the appendix, it very clearly tells you that prima facie, a woman who's 28 weeks pregnant is considered to have been, the baby is considered to have been capable of being born alive. So already there at the 28-week mark, you are being told this is a criminal offence in this document. So already at 28 weeks, beyond 28 weeks, you would not be able to perform an abortion unless it was in one of these very specific 3 categories, which is risk to the life of the pregnant woman, not risk to the health, risk to the life of a pregnant woman when a woman is at death's door. Risk to the substantial risk that the fetus is suffering from a fatal fetal abnormality, and where there's grave permanent injury to the woman. These are very exceptional and very rare circumstances. And taking into account that you're only talking now about the space between 12-week, if you want, and the 28-week, there's no limitation within that time, because there is no point at which a medical professional would not intervene to save the life of a woman. And most European legislation is exactly the same as this. There is no point at which it is too late or too early to intervene to save the life of a woman. And that's why there are no prescribed limitations. But there are very precise instructions that beyond 28 weeks, it would be child destruction, unless it was with a specific reason of dealing with a fatal fetal anomaly.
Okay. Thank you. Our next question comes from Isabel.
Selena, can you explain the Fraser Guidelines, or Gillick competencies as it's called, as per medical legislation?
Yes, I'm aware that a question was raised with, and there are a lot of concerns, very valid concerns about young girls accessing abortion services. And there's a series of competencies called Gillick competency. And this is medical law. This is not related just to sexual health and reproductive health. This is across the board. When a person between the age of 13, say, and 18 or 16 comes to a medical profession for any problem at all, there is a conversation. If that person comes without their parent, there is a conversation that needs to be had there about decision making. Gillick competency is a law which specified that if the 14, 15, 16-year-old has a maturity to understand the procedure, to understand the implications of the procedure and the consequences, their decisions have to be taken into account, even if it means excluding sometimes the wishes of the parent. Now, this can work both ways, because this can also mean that a 13-year-old could decide to keep a baby when their parents are deciding to march them off to the abortion clinic. Okay. Now, obviously, a 14 or 15-year-old that comes into a doctor's surgery with a problem would raise all kinds of safeguarding alarm bells. And I can assure you that there are rigorous procedures within the assessments that would ensure that the best interests of the child and the families are being met, and that these cases are being guided for. So that is what Gillick competencies is. Not everybody has a parent who can act in their best interests, and we need to recognise that.
And is your hope that that would be replicated in Gibraltar? Because the law says nothing about that, obviously.
No, that is already law in Gibraltar. And I know that is law in Gibraltar, medical law all about. And I know, for example, that is law, along with Fraser Guidelines, they are used in Gibraltar as well. That is standard medical law.
OK, our next question comes from Mandy.
Good evening. The Yes campaign claims to defend rights of women. You may call it a fetus, however, it is a human life. Like it or not, you are proposing to end a human life. It is a scientific fact that my life and all our lives in this room began in our mother's womb. Don't the pre-born women deserve a basic right to life? When do their rights start?
the rights, when do their rights stop? Because it seems that once you're born and you become to the age of 13, 14, 15, and you need people to defend your rights, it seems that those rights stop. And all of a sudden, you are forced to carry on through a pregnancy, and it goes on to the next generation. So the rights of women and the rights of a fetus are in balance, and the rights of a living, breathing woman with a family with concerns in the first 12 weeks of the age of the fetus will always, in my opinion, supersede the rights of the fetus, because most women that have abortions are mothers already. They have families. They have 101 concerns. They have 101 issues. And continuing with a pregnancy is not something they can do. Conversely, what you are saying is that these women should be forced to give birth to children that they cannot or do not want to look after. And the consequences of that, to me, are even more horrific, which is forcing women to go through pregnancies and have children that they don't want.
When does Gibraltar for Yes believe life starts?
Gibraltar for Yes is not embarking in a debate on conception and the beginning of life. This is not what this debate is about. It isn't. It is not what it is. It is what might concern you, and I appreciate that that is what concerns you. But it is not what we are legislating on. What we are legislating on is the right of women to not continue with pregnancies. That is what we are debating. The right of women to not continue with pregnancies if they come within certain parameters within the law. It's not your view. I accept that. I'm never going to convince you. You'll never convince me. But we are discussing a piece of legislation, and we are discussing the fact that this happens. Abortions happen. They are happening at an alarming rate. Would you not agree they are happening at an alarming rate? Exactly. So something needs to be done about that, because sticking our head in the sand is not working. It's not working.
Okay, thank you. Selena Gomez is answering questions on behalf of the Gibraltar... I've done that. Selena Victory. I joked before we started that it would happen. Then it happened. Selena Victory is answering questions for Gibraltar for Yes. We're going to go to Karen next, and I'll just remind the audience to be as respectful as possible. No heckling, please.
Good evening. During lockdown, our Chief Minister regularly impressed upon us that life is sacred. I quote his words. How does a law like this separate which life is sacred? Is one life more sacred than the other? Are we to choose which life is more sacred?
No, unfortunately, sometimes decisions do have to be made, and some lives are sacred. And the lives of women who are in pregnancies with a child or with a fetus that is going to endanger their health, that is going to cause them permanent grave damage and grave harm, that is going to damage their mental health and their ability to look after their existing people. Unfortunately, we also have to look at the sanctity and the quality and the value of those lives as well. And this is what this legislation does. This is what this legislation tries to do. It tries to achieve a balance, because it can't be that the balance is always in favour of the unborn fetus and at the expense of the rights of the living, breathing woman with a family, I'm afraid.
Our next question is from James.
Anne Farady, CEO of BPAS, the UK's largest abortion provider, has said that about the UK law that despite being one of the most restrictive laws on paper, it is one of the most liberal in the way it can be interpreted. Given that the proposed law is copied almost word for word from the UK law, how can you then claim this is not abortion on demand?
Well, certain bits are copied, but there are certain very, very notable exceptions. For example, the limit in the UK is 24 weeks. The limit in Gibraltar is 12 weeks. In the UK, you're allowed to abort in cases sometimes of Down syndrome, of disabilities. In the Gibraltar law, you are not able. It is not grounds. So there are sufficient differences to make it quite a bit different from the UK law. Some of the grounds are similar, but some are very distinctive. And as for being widely... Sorry, what was the second part of your question? Sorry, James.
The second part of the question is that effectively what she's saying is that even though it looks restrictive on paper, like the one here does, in practice it's very liberal and it can be interpreted very widely.
Well, I think that what happens is that now that once the law is passed, we will have all the protocols and everything which will be put in place to support this legislation. And I am very sure that it will be very, very rigorously applied to Gibraltar. So I think we we need to be confident that the rules will be kept to. And if you personally think that some of them are liberally applied, that's your point of view. I might not think that they are liberally applied in practice. That's your perception of how it is. I think people that need the service are getting the service, and I have no qualms with that.
Okay, we've got a question from Francis.
Hi, good evening. It's two-pronged question. One, do you believe that the life of the preborn has value? And if so, how do you assure and secure that? Thank you.
Well, I think I've answered that by saying that it has value in as much as what it represents to people who want to have a child. In that sense, it has value. But to the person that doesn't want to be pregnant, it has less value. And it has less value than the person who has a life and who has a family. You might not agree with that. But it's not a question of value. It's a question of a balance of the rights. And I think that the balance should fall in the early stages of pregnancy, in the first trimester, the balance should fall on the side of the mother. And subsequently, we're talking people in grave, serious, permanent damage. We're talking fatal fetal abnormalities. We are not talking... These women do not just rock up at 20 weeks and say, I don't want to have my baby anymore. These babies are fetuses, have value to those mothers and those parents, but because of whatever has happened, they are in the invidious, horrendous position of having to choose, and they need our support. They don't need our judgment, and they don't need to be told that what they've done is some horrendous crime.
Next question is from Joe.
Hi. A preamble, because a lot of the things that I've asked here have already been answered, but...
Very short then, Joe, please.
Lord Steele, an architect of the 67 Abortion Act in the UK, admitted in 2007 that he did not anticipate anything like the number of abortions and terminations in the UK. 1 in 5 pregnancies in England now end in abortion. Obviously, if they are rigorously applied, the law, I don't think that 1 in 5 fatal fetal abnormalities. So are you suggesting that, or do you fear that in Gibraltar there will be an overwhelming amount of abortions so that we will mirror what Lord Steele said, that is nothing like what was predicted?
Well, it's very hard to predict what the demands of a service are going to be if the service doesn't exist. And this is a problem. We have no idea what the demands are going to be. And if those are the facts of the service, it's because that demand was there. And what we need to be looking about is why that demand was there. And was it because of not adequate contraception or sexual health services? So the demand is there, and we need to be looking at the root causes. The cases of fatal fetal anomaly are very exceptional cases, and we're talking about that later on in second trimester pregnancies. In first trimester pregnancies, there are a lot of other conditions, obviously, we would put you legally entitled to seek an abortion. So I'm not for a moment suggesting that 1 in 5 women have fatal anomalies, if that's what you're suggesting, no.
What accounts for the most of those abortions, the reasons?
The most of the reasons in the UK, and I think I'm not going to hide it because I know people are making a big thing that it's cynically saying, oh, mental health problems. I happen to think that that is a very serious and valid reason for women to have an abortion. When you have a partner unemployed, 2 children, 1 possibly with a disability, and on a short-term 0 hours contract, and you get pregnant because of contraception failure, that is going to impact in your mental health. You can't put those 5 reasons on your abortion form. It's the sum total of all those things which affect your mental health. And that might be that one thing that tips you over the edge. So when you're dealing with abortions in the very early stages, 8, 9, 10 weeks, which 80% of abortions occur in that time, of course it's the mental health impact on the family which is going to be the main reason why people seek those abortions. And we all know that the mental health of a parent is fundamental to the health and the well-being of all the family and all the siblings. It is a really important thing. I don't understand why we are looking down on the fact that people apply for abortions on mental health grounds.
Thank you. Our next question from Louise, please. Louise has the next question.
Hello, good evening. The law already protects a woman's life in pregnancy here in Gibraltar. This law is about abortion in much more wide-ranging situations. Do you believe in any limitations on abortion?
Yes, of course I believe on limitations, and this law provides limitations, and it is having a wider range of grounds in the first 12 weeks, which in my opinion is an acceptable time frame within which people can seek an abortion. When we're looking at the 12 weeks, in actual fact, most abortions will occur in the first 10 weeks. So we're talking about very, very early stages, very, very, very early gestation. So in my opinion, it does allow, and sorry, I lost the thread. Can you repeat the question again? It's a bit stressful, this.
Yes, of course, I sympathise. Do you want the whole question again?
Yes, please.
Right. The law already protects a woman's life in pregnancy here in Gib.
Okay.
This law is about abortion in much more wide-ranging situations. Do you believe in any limitations on abortion?
Okay, so I think I've answered the second part, but the first part is with regards to women and the law that protection provides for women. The law at the moment only covers women in very, very imminent risk of danger. It only covers the preservation of the life of the mother. So we're talking right up to the edge. There are many situations where the life of a mother is at risk, which are not crises of a in-the-moment crises. And even for that, court orders very often have to be sought, and we have to wait for medical directors and even the Attorney General to actually allow an abortion to be performed on a woman who is literally at death's door. That is a fact. Okay, but there are many other situations where a woman's health might be at risk, which are not in that crisis situation. If a woman is diagnosed with cancer, if a woman has a terminal illness, if a woman has a road traffic accident, there are many other situations where the life of the mother could be at risk. And unfortunately, this new legislation will cover that. But the old legislation did not cover that. The old legislation was forcing women, for example, to choose between having chemotherapy treatment or continuing with a pregnancy. That is not right.
Okay. Time is up for questions. Thank you to our public for now. The Gibraltar for Yes campaign has 1 minute to make a closing statement.
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody for their questions, and I want to say that at the end of the day, both campaigns want the same thing. We want better sexual health services for women. We want women not to be having to resort to abortions, but we can't bury our head in the sand and think by not legislating the problem is going to go away. The evidence shows that the lower abortion rates are in countries with less restrictive laws. That is there. We have to grab the bull by the horns, and we have to get together and say, realistically, what do we want to achieve? And how are we going to achieve that?
Yes. Selena Victory of the Gibraltar for Yes campaign, thank you. The referendum is in exactly 2 weeks. You can go to parliament.gi, click on referendum for more information. We're live from the Leisure Cinemas. Viewpoint, The Options will be back in a few minutes. Stay with us.